used to laugh when we were doing IP management strategies
that the worst thing we could do is to put two or more creative people in the room at the same time. Because you never knew at the end of the day, and I've seen this happen too many times, where the idea would start over here, and at the end of the day, this guy would claim he came up with it, or the idea would start over here, and it'd go through 3 generations of improvement by the end of the meeting, and it wasn't clear who improved it, or whether this is now a collective ownership or something else. And so after you go through that analysis, then you just do this, and you're done. That's your analysis. It's fun to talk about creative stuff, but it's sometimes beyond management. Occasionally I'll make some comments which probably should be framed as an opinion. Sometimes my opinions are not necessarily the truth, they're just my truth. Somebody was making fun of me the other day because we were sitting there going through a series of bad investment projects that we were involved with, and by the time we got done, they thought about calling 911 and asking for a therapy unit to come in and sit down with us, because the level of energy in the room had gotten so low, it's like scrape us up and haul us home, because we've all been through this group I was talking to, had all been through so many deals where great product, great market, and somebody did something really stupid, and everything came crumbling down, and it comes down hard, very fast. Gravity works very effectively at that point. And so at times I can't put enough warnings, words of caution, things into that, and particularly when the question was coming up about people trying to make quick money, that almost goes hand in hand with a problem arising somewhere down the road. I would take odds in favor of issues arising from that scenario. It's not a maybe, it will happen, it's just how often it will happen. And the idea here, again, is to get you in a position where your business can succeed. You have the resources you need. In some ways you want as much as you need and not more, because you don't want to give away stuff that at a price point that you could have sold later at a higher price point and kept more for yourself to reward you for what you've done. But at the same time, it is a competitive marketplace, and you're trying to align yourself with the investor and what they're willing to pay for, their perception of value, because that is the marketplace. And it's also competitive because everybody else is out there looking for money, and some people are in a position where they'll do it for free. I have a daughter who wants to become a film director, and I'm trying to ask her to start the monetization thinking now, because we were talking about tuition. And somebody says, well, you could borrow all that money to go to school. And I go, yeah, but are you going to pay it back in a year or over your entire lifetime? I mean, you really have to understand, in the movie industry, there are people who will do anything to be in the movie industry for free. And that's your competition. So if you want to have a job in the movie industry, you're competing against people who will do it for free. And some of them are people who have enough money that they can do it for free. And there's enough of those actually probably to fill every job in the movie industry if they were any good. So you have that competition to deal with. These are things that go through your mind as you start trying to go out there, but at the end of the day, they can cause this brain freeze and you can't get anything done. So let's go back to solving problems. If you're solving problems that exist and you're effective at solving problems, and the problem is of enough magnitude, there's a viable business in there somewhere. You may have to change your business structure, you may have to change your team, you may have to change your price points, your delivery, you may have to ease into the market or wait for the market to catch up with you in order to do that. Chris asked a question over the earlier break about discussing the type of business vehicle you're using. Are you a for-profit, non-profit? If you're a for-profit, or you're an LLC, partnership, or corporation? We don't have the time to get into that today, but every one of these vehicles should be viewed as a tool for achieving your objective. And if the tool doesn't fit, get a different tool, change to a different vehicle. Part of the reason I've been doing this dance back and forth between social enterprises and a classical business model and the charitable model is that there are certain things that need to be done, but I cannot create a high enough ROI to attract guys who only care about ROI. They go, all I want to do is make money. I go, well, we're not going to make that much money here because we're going to do great good, and there's just not that much margin in it. So I have to talk to an audience who cares about doing great good, But at the same time, there's a lot of people go, you know, I gave my money to charity 10 years ago. They have the same problems today they had 10 years ago. That's why it's causing frustration. They go, I want this problem to disappear. I don't want to sustain it. I don't want to nurture it. I don't want to be considered a caretaker for the problem. I want it to go away. Okay, so we need more resources. Okay, now maybe the charitable model will no longer work. So the new thing of social enterprises is new, it's untested. We're one of the guinea pigs in this experiment, but we'll see. You have to have the right tool though. If it doesn't fit, you know, don't do it. Find something better. You have that option. Some people start up the company, form the C, and then they do the business plan. I go, it's backwards. You should have your business plan before you pick your business model. Go back to that. Okay, we're going to go through the private placement memorandum, statement of ownership. This is a pie chart showing who owns DaVinci Quest if we are successful in raising money and if we hire a bunch of people and give them stock in our company through options or otherwise through what I call stage one of our prospective future existence. When you talk to an investor, at the end of the day, they want to know what the company is going to look like, not today, but the day that they have their cash exit, when they get their money back. Okay? If you intend to have 4 rounds or 14 rounds of funding in the future, and each one of them is diluting ownership, you need to have that into your plan if that's a likely probability so that the investor knows what the pie is going to look like on the day you're cutting the checks. Okay, so you've got a brand new technology. You say, I need enough money to prove the technology works. I'm going to raise $1 million. Okay, but I know if the technology works, then I have to create a manufacturing facility to do that. I'm going to need to raise another $5 million. And then once the manufacturing facility is done, then I'm going to need marketing money. I'm going to need $25 million. And if I have to go raise all those, then when I'm talking to the investor in the first round about $1 million, I also have to go out to, after I've raised the $25 million, anticipate what the price points are going to be for that, how much equity I'm going to give up. And I'm going to say, in the future, it's likely that your share of the pie is going to be this big, and that's what we're going to cut checks out of. The day that we decide we're going to start writing checks because we're going to cash out of this baby, we just sold off to Microsoft, Google, Cisco, or somebody else who has money in their pocket today, you're going to own this much of the company. That's what you're going to get paid from. Question?
Is this chart here specifically for the initial offering or
This is for,
the one you just got through talking about?
well, this one represents the initial offering. The question is, does this chart represent the initial offering or somewhere down the road?
Because it doesn't say.
It doesn't say, and the reason for that is because I don't know. This is one of the fun things about starting a business. Sometimes you have to step up in front of an investor and go, this is our best guess today. We may raise money in the future, but I don't know that we will, and we've made no provision for it in this offering document.
But it also doesn't state that in the document that I can see just from that chart.
Not from the chart, no. It's in the fine wording of the risk factors. Okay. Now, we are looking at doing later rounds, but we may do it where we set up a limited partnership where we take a general partnership position and wrap it around an individual contest, but that will not dilute this pie. So I don't have to disclose that, although it is also in the document. But I have to go far enough forward, and if you think you're going to raise subsequent rounds, you need to be talking about that, is because one of the things in your PPM is when I divide the pie, how big is the pie going to be for that individual investor? Okay. Second thing that needs to be in there is the risk factors. Risk factors are everything that materially could go wrong. It's not everything that could go wrong. You couldn't write a book large enough to contain everything that could go wrong, but things that are high probability of going wrong, high enough that you need to put them in there and from your perspective. And in this case, one of the factors almost everybody has in a startup is this is new. It's never been done before. Things like this fail often. Okay? That seems kind of obvious, but to somebody who's trying to make, all their money on the roulette wheel over here, you want this in your document, because when you lose their money and or they don't get their money back in 6 months, it ends up being the 6-year plan instead of the 6-month plan for payback. You want to say, hey, I told you in the document that it's there. To put this in perspective of legal compliance, if you're raising money from accredited investors, you are not required to have this document. You're not required to have any document. The law assumes if you're an accredited investor, you're smart enough or rich enough to hire somebody who's smart enough to make a decision or to aid you in making your decision, and they are not there to protect you any longer. Okay, and that's the...
Is that still is it increased from the $1 million without your house and all that jazz?
Not for individuals. Okay, the question is the status to be an accredited investor, according to the SEC today, and this applies to individuals, there's different thresholds for other types of business entities, is you have $1 million net worth today, or your income this year is $200,000, and the last 2 years was $200,000. Or if you combine it with your spouse, it's $300,000 this year and $300,000 the last 2 years. This threshold has not changed in forever. It probably is way too low from a variety of perspectives. Any farmer who has any land in the United States typically will meet the definition of an accredited investor, even though they have no assets to invest, because they're totally illiquid. Now, they recently changed these thresholds for hedge funds, and they pushed it up to, I think it's around 5 million or somewhere north of that amount. But I don't think any of you are running hedge funds, so I'll skip over that. But what you're doing here with the private placement memorandum is you're satisfying the requirements of regulators for non-accredited investors. Meaning that if you have less than this number, this income or net asset, they require you to have a written document which materially discloses all facts that an investor should know before making an investment. And if that sounds gray, ambiguous, and unattainable, that's pretty much true, okay? Because you don't know sometimes. When I did a project, it was a 3D audio conversion technology, and we had just concluded a successful demonstration with Disney, and we were still raising money while we were still building, perfecting prototypes. And we had Harry Connick Jr. ready to meet us in New York City on the 17th of the month to endorse us as a spokesperson from his industry. And we're talking about the month of September of the year 2001. I did not have in my risk statements, terrorists will destroy the World Trade Center and cause the entertainment industry to kind of take a one-year layoff. Okay. Now, it wasn't in there. Somebody could have said, you should have had that in there. But that was reaching a little bit too far. There was more than enough insurance companies putting distance between themselves and the possibility of being responsible. But it wasn't in there, but it killed our business. I mean, when people talk about terrorism and World Trade Towers, I happen to know people who were personally in the towers who survived. I unfortunately don't know anybody who was in the towers who did not survive, but it killed this business 100%. It drove it into the ground so deep we couldn't get out again. Disney was talking about speccing in our technology as a standard on all their outdoor attractions. Actually did not return our calls for 6 months and then laid off everybody in the staff that we'd spent a year training to love our technology. Okay, you cannot spike a technology any harder than that. I still haven't got Harry Connick Jr. to return my calls either, but that's another story.
Didn't item 1 cover you in that though?
If you read through the risk factors in the PPM, I've got, I think, about 15 in there. And a lot of these are generic because at an early stage, all companies look alike, whether you like it or not, from a risk standpoint. We have a new team, we've never worked before, we may need more people, we may need more money, we don't know what we're doing, nobody knows if we're any good or not. You go through all these factors and you go, wow, okay, this is pretty ugly, which is true. A startup is really ugly in terms of a risk standpoint. And you have to disclose all these things, that's what it's about. You put it in the PPM, you don't need it in a business plan because you don't have investors to talk to, even though you should be thinking about this in terms of your strategies of risk avoidance and risk management. But at this point, it needs to be in there so that an investor who is not accredited, who doesn't have money, who doesn't have a financial advisor on their arm, can look at this and go, what does that mean? And you have to give them a chance to read it, ask you the question. If they don't read it, most of them won't it's not your fault any longer. That's when the court goes, are you an adult? Can you read? You know, I'm going to hold up this page. Can you read this back to me? I've actually done this. Yeah. The guy's going, I lost all my money. And I says, well, did you get the private placement memorandum? Oh, yeah, I got it. Okay, well, did you read this page? I don't remember. Well, read it now. What's it say? And he says, what do you understand that to mean? He says, well, I could lose all my money. Judge says, you're done. Okay. But it's an insurance policy, okay, from your perspective, it's an insurance policy that when things can and they may go wrong, this is what you hold up and say, I warned you, you gave me the money anyway. If anybody was rational, you know, and logical after reading one of these things, they never give you money. It's an interesting paradox. Okay, the other thing, terms of offering. This is when you say, you give me so much money, I'm going to give you so much back. This is where, in this case, it's a $500,000 offering. It's 0.2% per unit. You got to buy a minimum of 10 units, I think. Yeah, 10 units. $50,000 minimum offering. Now, we're going for accredited investors. I could still lower this dollar amount to $10,000 if I verified, you know, that the person met the requirements for accredited investors. I, as a safeguard, because I have found that non-accredited investors rarely have $50,000 in their pocket, so I don't have to worry about being surprised, and it's my responsibility if I am surprised. You know, can't write a $50,000 check, so as long as they write a $50,000 check, I have a practical guideline that they met accredited status. I also don't want 5,000 investors, even if they're accredited, because then I have to talk to 5,000 investors. Now, there are certain occasions where that's a good thing, and this may actually be one of them, where if you think of an investor solely as an ATM, the fewer investors, the better. One is optimum, because you're going to go down the ATM once, you're going to get your money, you're going to go do what you want to do. Now, if your investor brings anything to the table other than cash, contacts, resources, advice, knowledge, customers, and so forth, you may want more investors, because they're all now aligned with you and have a secondary reason for your business to succeed. And therefore, they have a lot of good investors. If you're optimizing your investor portfolio, and that's a strategic issue we won't get into today, they should bring more value than their money, or you shouldn't take their money. Just keep that as a guideline. Anyway, this is the structure of what we did. There's more descriptions. We've got a cutoff on this offering of September 1st. I just told Chris that for the first time, so when his eyes lit up, I could tell I struck a chord there. Yeah, well, what I did, we talked earlier about creating a sense of urgency. I have 6 months up here, but I'm telling everybody I got 60 days. I got to raise this money in 60 days. They're going to get their money in 60 days or the deal's gone. Now, I have the right to go back to the board. We can have a resolution giving me a 30-day or 45-day extension. It's stated in the private placement memorandum. But in this case, I don't want to talk to anybody about investing in Christmas time. I want to talk to them about investing today. If they can't write me a check in the next 60 days, I don't want to talk to them. That's just me personally.
Have you raised any money yet?
No. No, I think we've had maybe 3 legitimate conversations, and we've got a series of introductions that should happen next week, but so far I don't have anything. I would like to be a shining example. I'd like to be able to say I had all the money I needed, but that'd be a misrepresentation.
What's your business entity?
We're using a limited liability company. The question was what kind of business structure we're using. We're using a limited liability company. I prefer that as a business structure. One, because it creates a cash exit automatically for the investors, particularly individuals, so as profits are earned, they're distributed. I don't have to have an event like a merger or a sale of the company in order to provide cash through to the investors. Also, if I feel a need to take it to a C Corp to qualify it for a merger or certain tax advantages or other things, I can convert it from an LLC to a C Corp without a tax event. I cannot go from a C Corp to an LLC without having a recognition of earnings. So I will typically start with an LLC, and then sometimes I'll graduate to a C, but very rarely. I'm sorry, the question is it normal to have three contacts and no money? If I had money out of the first 3, I would be ecstatic. part of the problem is that we just finished this profile actually a couple days ago. This is after talking to a bunch of people and getting all kinds of feedback about do you care or not care. And so we were talking to a lot of the wrong people. And you can't tell that until you've kind of done a little trial run, a little market study, so to speak. Yeah, the question was would we have a potentially better business model, organizational model, if we were structured as a 501c3 instead of a for-profit? Yes, we have looked at that issue. We've at least confused 10 people I know beyond belief to the point they walked out on me and go, I have no idea what you're doing. But the matter is that, again, distinguishing between product, service, and investment. If I were to be a charity, I have to get money from a person of certain size, shape, form, whereas in investment, I actually have a broader range of people to talk to. So I think, one, I can recruit resources easier and in greater volume than I can as a charity. That's an opinion of mine. I can't substantiate that yet. Okay, the question or the comment was about creating two entities, a for-profit and a non-profit as symbiotes. I love the idea. The IRS hates it. And I spent 12 months arguing with the IRS about the too close of a proximity between the two entities. They would not grant the 501c3 until we had put in a whole raft of safeguards to prevent the for-profit from benefiting from the existence of the nonprofit. It's not that it can't be done. I think it should be done, but the IRS hates it. There is no requirement. Okay, the question is what are the guidelines under which an investor may take an active role in the company? Is that an automatic requirement or is it an optional requirement? The answer is a little more complicated in that if you're selling a company and you're giving them a large enough position in the company that they can buy that position, elect somebody to the board of directors, they can vote themselves into a management position. Okay. If they do not get a large enough equity position to mandate their way in, then they have to negotiate for that within the framework of their investment agreement. And that's an option to you, whether you want to give it up or not. Technically, in order to make it work, you have to have a side agreement called a shareholders agreement, where if Tom and I were to agree to allow somebody to be on our board of managers, we can't do it purely through the investment agreement. We would have to sign a side agreement that's between Tom, me, and the investor that says we will vote our shares to put that person on the board for a period of time. It requires another agreement that is not here. Do you understand? Okay.
Is there an investment agreement in the package?
You have to do the investment agreement as well. That's between the company and the investor.
Is that in the package?
Yeah, the agreement is in the package. You've got an investor agreement, you have a revenue share and a loan agreement samples in there. But I do not have a shareholders side agreement in there. The question is if the investor becomes part of active management, is it no longer a security? And the answer is, in some cases, it is no longer a security. If the position that the person takes with the company is a director or officer position with the company, then selling stock to them is no longer a sales security.
What about in an LLC?
Same issue. You're sitting either in a management position, a C-level management, or on the board of managers. It's not a sales security. The theory of security is you put your money in somebody else's hands and you hope they do good with it. Once you give the money to yourself, that's not an investment. So if you're sitting in the management chair and you invested, it's not a sales security, and you don't count against the non-accredited status either that the SEC has of 35 investors. No, I don't. I typically want communication with all my investors. I'm very selective in my approach to investors. I want investors I love, ones I'm happy that they're even talking to me, let alone investing in me, because of what they bring beyond their money. And I want them talking to me as often as I can reasonably handle. If I think I'm going to take money from somebody who's going to be a problem, who's like talking to me 20 times a day and I can't breathe because of the closeness, there's really nothing in the contract that you're going to put there to say don't do that. you have to manage that relationship outside the parameters of the agreement. I sometimes find them a consulting project outside the country, and I have. Sale of equity agreement this is just the primary clause. So much money comes in, so much equity goes out. It's an exchange, it's a sale. I'm selling a right to participate in profits and losses for a particular price. Now, this is surrounded by a lot of legal material. It says, you know, who's who, what we're doing, what if things go wrong, if there's a lawsuit, how we're going to settle the dispute, things of that nature. And you can expand and customize this as much as you want to. If you're not comfortable drafting agreements, if you haven't done it a lot, then you need to have advice. That advice typically takes the form of an attorney, and in this case, a securities attorney as opposed to a average attorney. There are a lot of good people out there that I work with. I rely upon securities attorneys even though I do this stuff all the time because this is what they live and breathe, and every time the law twitches, they're familiar with it, where I may hear about it 6 months later, which may be too late. But this is a contract. It's like selling anything. You can make it as specific or as customized as you want to make it. You have to do it within a degree of reasonableness. This particular agreement has a whole bunch of things in it which talks about warranties by the investor that they are complying with the law, that they're buying this for their own account, they're not acting as a broker, that they're not misrepresenting who they are, that they're an accredited investor, these kinds of things. Because again, if there's an issue down the road and somebody says, well, you know, you sold me stuff and I wasn't an accredited investor, I go, well, then you committed fraud because you made an affirmative representation within the middle of this contract that you were. I relied upon that, and now you tell me you're not, and it's my fault. I don't think so, you know. So I can void the contract, which means I get to walk away.
This term accredited investor?
Yes.
Is that something that you physically have a piece of paper that says I'm accredited, you've signed up for?
It's in the contract.
So it's
Okay, the question is
not like a title that I applied to be an accredited investor?
no, the question is on an accredited investor. It's a benchmark established by the Securities and Exchange Commission and adopted by all states. Now, certain states will have lower thresholds which allow you to do different things, and some don't care so much. But it basically, and some states don't allow you, when they get into their definition, if you're doing something in their backyard, you have to subtract the value of your house, okay, as an asset, which kills a lot of people out of the category. But that's if you're doing something solely within the state. The primary definition is the SEC. It's out there. If you meet the definition, then this is how things work.
Including the house in most cases.
Yeah, the SEC allows you to include the house in your value, or your farm, or anything else you should never sell. Yes?
Carl, I've never seen a list of the percentage ownership in an offering before. That's only in LLC because you always have to have 100% membership. In a corporation, you couldn't do that, right?
Well,
Because you're always changing the percentage as you increase shares.
No, what you do it in more commonly in a corporation, you're going to talk about the shares held, and sometimes, it's typically required anybody that's holding a certain percentage of stock in the company, it's either 5 or 10% or more. You disclose who they are, so you know who the significant shareholders are.
Back to the previous slide.
Yeah.
In the offering, you had each unit represents 0.2%.
Yeah.
But you can only do that in LLC because there's always 100% membership
No,
ownership.
no, you can do that in corporations.
But every time you issue shares, the percentage would change,
Well, that's true.
right?
Right, but you're talking about the conclusion of the offering. This will say, if this offering is successful, and if we distribute stock to all of our employees according to all possible options within all possible agreements, this is what the picture looks like.
Full distribution of your cap
Yeah.
table, so you put that in there.
Yeah.
So
And I do that in corporations also, for the same reason. It's too easy in a corporation setting to get trapped up in, well, I've got 500,000 or a million shares of stock. I go, at the end of the day, that stock participates in the profits and losses of the total entity, and I want to know what percentage that represents of the total entity. I've had people come to me with offering documents, and they go, well, you get 5 million shares of stock. And I go, but what's the percentage of the total shares outstanding? You know, what's the float, or you know, all these other ways of looking at this. And they go, well, why would you want to know that? It's about whether the stock goes up or down. I go, okay. You know, entertain me. Tell me what that means. And they go, oh, well, you have something percent. I'm going, so if you make $50 billion of profit in year 5, I may get my money back. I go, I pass. The question is, do all the contracts that we're almost talking about have a provision for dilution? Dilution happens when you have this piece of the pie that's this big when you buy stock today or equity today, and then at a later point in time, you either give stock to an employee or you do a second offering round or you do something and your piece of the pie shrinks. And it is recommended that in any document you put, you always say, we don't know, but we probably will raise money in the future, and if we ever do raise money, you're going to be diluted. Now, again, certain people will say, well, isn't that obvious? But having been in a couple courtroom situations where it was not so obvious, I put it in there. I mean, it just, people go, isn't my piece stay the same? And you can write it that way. You can write an investment agreement where your piece never shrinks, which means yours shrinks disproportionately every time somebody else comes into the deal. And you can do it that way. I don't do it that way, but that's an option. Sometimes you have to do that in order to get a person on board. They don't want to, they say, I don't want to be diluted to death. Okay, fine, go somewhere else. But you know, you have to be prepared. I usually don't put restrictions of that nature. I don't like anything that handcuffs me in the management of a company. That doesn't mean an investor may not want to bargain for it, or in certain cases doesn't have enough strength to put restrictions in place. However, in the revenue sharing agreement, you'll see some of these examples where the idea is that the money comes in 4 tranches, even though it's a single investment commitment. And there are restrictions on the money being used specifically for the use of proceeds as stated. And at the end, because I wrote this when I was wearing my hat as an investor, I said if the principals of the company had to sign a personal guarantee that if they went outside the parameters of use of proceeds, they were personally liable to the extent they went outside the boundaries. Because I had limited comfort they were going to stay inside the lines.
I've been involved in deals where, putting those lines in were important, turned out to be important without the lines, because everything is great when everyone's making plenty of money. When the deal's not making plenty of money, we get in trouble, and you've got activist investors. So that's when all the lawyers start rolling out, and that's when everyone starts reading the deals real close, and you want to start ripping into you. So if you protect yourself up front and give yourself authority to do things up front, well then it's just tough luck. But if it's open and it has not been addressed, and they start coming in and questioning your judgment.
Well, right, and it's just like today, if the market goes bad, then maybe everybody has to take a haircut and take half the salary for a while. Well, that's prudent, looks good, but isn't legally required. And yet your investors are going, aren't you going to have a change of your operational modality here? And you say, well, I don't want to, because I really want to pay my mortgage this month. And they're going, but we want the company to survive, and we think you're putting yourself ahead of the company. As an officer of the company, you are always being examined to determine whether or not what you're doing for yourself is doing a disservice to your company. It's always there. Now, you can build in safeguards or bunkers around that kind of a thing, and you have to do that, again, with your investors, depending upon how sophisticated they are or not. It's part of the reason why I dislike unsophisticated investors, because they tend to go crazy early. When things go wrong. And just when you think it couldn't get any worse, take 100 phone calls from investors all in the same day, wanting to know what happened. Part of the problem you're going to be up against is you go, I could spend 2 weeks writing everything into this contract, trying to anticipate everything, and at the end of the day, your best effort typically still won't save you from something you didn't think about or something came up. But there are reasonable guidelines, and that's why when you draft these things, you want to be thinking along those terms. Sale of equity, we talked about that. Revenue share. This is a form of doing business investment that is not widely used, but I think it really would work better for a lot of different companies. In this case, instead of waiting for profits to fall to the bottom line and then doing distributions, from there in the form of dividends or letting it accrue into your capital account where you get paid later upon merger or something, what you're doing is you're taking money off the top, out of revenue, and you're distributing that as you go along, like a book royalty or oil and gas lease royalty or something of that nature. The reason why I like it in many occasions is because you may be 3 years away from profitability, but only 3 months away from cash flow. That means from an investor perspective, they can start getting a little bit of money back sooner, which serves to replenish the capital they gave you, and it gives them a higher level of comfort in the structure of your deal, even though inherently you've not changed the risk profile. Your chances of surviving, winning in this contest with your company is not impacted necessarily by the fact that you're using this as a different way of working with your investors, but the investor perception is this is a better deal because I get cash back quicker. And in many cases, I've seen people like this one over the more classical form because there's some chance that they may recapture their capital even if the company fails.
Is that gross revenue?
Yeah, it's gross revenue. Let's qualify that. The question is whether or not the revenue is gross revenue. It's from earned revenue as opposed to, I would call, unearned or other types of incidental income which may come in. So in some cases, we'll define this and we'll exclude certain things that may come in the door so that it's not confused with either capital infusions or other types of money that may come in that you're holding for a period of time.
And this is income you're paying, not return of investment?
Now, but for example, say we took the DaVinci Quest thing, and the question is this different? And I'm reframing the question because I have to in order to get to an answer. If DaVinci Quest were to, instead of doing an equity investment where we're going to pay a percentage of the profits out, we said we were going to do a revenue share. Okay. By revenue share, then if I get a contest sponsor who gives me $20 and I have a revenue share of 5%, that means that $1 I'm going to give directly to my investor for every $20 that comes in the door. It's coming out of revenue as opposed to out of profits. On that first $20, I can guarantee you we're not going to make any profit. We're going to be upside down. I forget what our break-even point was. It keeps moving. Anyway, we have to have so many people, buying our product and service before we overcome our overhead and prior investment to get to a true profitability point where we could talk profits and losses. Up to that point, we're in losses. But with this, I'm paying back on, I could have revenue next week, and I could send they invest today, I give them a check next week for $1 for everyone that comes in the door. Now, what I typically do with these types of arrangements is I agree to pay them back until we reach a threshold or a cap. And in the agreement that's in the on the USB, it's a 500% rate of return. You put it's not 500% rate of return; it's a 500% payback. Just to clarify the distinction there. You put in $1, we're going to give you $5 back over time. Once we get to $5, you're done. Okay. So it's not a forever type of commitment. It's until I hit a certain objective or milestone. In this agreement also, you'll find this an interesting thing because, as I said, this was written from an investor's. I had an investor's hat on. We were putting together a small venture fund here, or seed capital fund for the state of Colorado, which for all the usual reasons fell apart, just like any other business, before we could get it implemented. And we were trying to figure out how we can make this thing work to minimize risk to the investor so we had a broader audience that would be involved. So we were doing a number of strange and interesting things. One is that in this thing, the money, even though it's, say it's $1 commitment, you're only going to invest it in 4 tranches or 4 rounds. 25 cents would go to the company initially, and then the company had to hit milestones, which are defined in the agreement before they could get any more money. And there was actually 3 sets of milestones in order to get 100% of the money. And our idea was that by the time they got to the last set of milestones and achieved those, they would have momentum in the right direction, which meant that likely the company was going to succeed and carry it forward. And so there are a set of milestones in here for the company, and I wrote in some stuff for DaVinci Quest, which sort of fits the bill where we get a prize sponsor and we get other types of things in there, which would allow us to get a full $500,000 out of this round. But if you really know what your milestones are and when they're going to occur, From an investor standpoint, what they're thinking is, instead of giving you all the money, crossing my fingers, and someday somebody will call me and tell me whether or not I won the lottery, in this case, they're getting money very early on because it's out of cash flow, and they don't take all my money unless they're achieving milestones, which means I may get part of my capital back if they fall down. And if the first milestone is we're going to make this technology work, and you can never get it to work, then I still get 3/4 of my money back. Okay? Or in fact, it doesn't go anywhere. It depends on how you hold the money. So we have milestones in here. And then, as I said, we had the guaranteed clause. We have a use of proceeds. We said you can use the money for the following things. There's a $500,000 budget in here, which is also the one that made it into the plan, which is the wrong budget I mentioned earlier. But as you go through this thing, if money is spent to buy me a brand new BMW, which is not in the use of proceeds, I become personally liable, for repaying that portion of this money. And this is kind of a hedge between a loan agreement, which we'll talk about in a moment, where I may have full personal liability to pay the loan back in order to get it. I talked to my banker over at Chase Bank to make sure I was up to speed on the current underwriting requirements for a loan, and he's, yep, it's still 100% guaranteed by you personally. I go, okay, fine, just want to make sure. But in this case, I said, if you take the money and you drive through the milestones and you give it best efforts and you spend it the way you say it is, you don't have to pay any of it back personally. So this has an advantage to the entrepreneur in that they don't have this open-ended exposure to pay back the amount of the investment, but there is safeguards to the investor that if they spend the money outside the use of proceeds, then they do become personally liable. Back in the 80s, here in Colorado, we had a bunch of companies go public, and I was involved with helping some of them do that. And all too often, the first thing that would happen is a set of Beamers would show up in the parking lot right after the offering was over, and you're sitting there going, well, that's going to help drive productivity of the company. I can tell that the morale is going to be high here for a while, but I'm not sure that's going to get any product out the door, and it usually didn't help get product out the door at all. And so having parameters on how money is going to be used, again, is something you should know. You should be able to answer these questions, and some investors may want you to put it on paper and stick it in the contract. The last form of agreement is a loan agreement. A loan agreement is somebody gives you money, you pay them back, and you pay a rate of interest on it. Anybody who's had a car loan, house loan, has been through a loan debt agreement. They're very common, but they are generally completely inappropriate for a startup venture because you don't have the cash to pay them back unless you're generating revenue already, and therefore the potential for you to go upside down, meaning you have more payments going out than you have money coming in, is so high, so likely, so probable that that I don't even want to suffer through you telling me that you did it. Okay. You say, if you told me you started a company, you just took out a loan, I'm going to say, call me in a year or two, after the pain's over, because I don't want to live through this experience again. The deja vu is just, too harsh. A lot of people do this on their credit cards. The good news is today that you don't have as many opportunities to use your credit cards as you used to. And those of you who've already done it with your credit cards and have seen the rate spike up to 25%, even though you didn't do anything wrong, you're not going to be able to maintain that for a while. So this problem will go away. But it was very common to stack credit cards. I've done it. I don't recommend you do it. It's not because I'm a professional and you're amateurs. I'm not making that statement. It's just bad. Don't do it, okay? Don't go there. Yes, they can be. The question is whether or not a loan is a security, one that's regulated by the government. The distinction here is that technically any loan is a security, but if it is a loan from a bank, which is regulated by a different branch of government, then they let that branch of government take care of it. If you get a loan from an individual, not from a bank, not from a licensed financial institution, it is a security just like selling equity in your company, and you have to comply with all the laws, including those versus accredited, non-accredited, and so on. Okay?
Is there a definition of security?
Yeah.
Did you say that?
No, I did not. The question is, what is the definition of security? The short answer, because the long one is beyond. I've tried to relate it along. I can't quote the statute either because you read it, you go, what the heck did that mean? It has to do with somebody gives you money, they give you care and control over their money with an expectation you're going to give something back to them later. Okay? And the distinction is who's in charge of the money, which is why when you asked the question earlier, if you're on a director or officer of a company and you stick money into that company, you're giving it to yourself, so there's no security. Okay? There is no third person, that's looking out for your money. You gave it to yourself. Even though it's within your own company, it's still the same thing. One of the ways to duck some of the legal requirements is to only put people, take money from people who come on as an officer or director. If you have a small club, you need a small amount of money, because then there's no securities involved. Okay, or if you have a true partnership, okay, say you have a member-managed limited partnership, member-managed limited liability company, or a general partnership where everybody has a right to vote in the ongoing affairs of the company, that is not a sale of security, because as a partner you have a right to vote and speak in the management of the money. Okay. Now, practically, you have too many partners, too many players, they're going to call it a security anyway, because they're going to challenge you to prove that you did or did not have the right to participate in the operations of the company. And I've run limited liability companies where we had 225 members. And every time we did anything that I thought anybody would ever question me about, we did a vote. We set it up electronically. We want to do this, thumbs up, thumbs down. We build it into the operational agreement to allow us to do that. So they all could show to the tax man that they were materially involved in day-to-day operations of the company. Now, they didn't have to show up at the office, and they didn't have to do the other things, but any decision of any consequence, like, hey, I want to go to New York for this conference or something, out it went, okay? And so our goal is to try to satisfy the tax requirements for being materially involved in day, which is different from the SEC. We won't get into that. Type of investors, residents, so forth. Okay. Depending upon the type of investment that you're running depends upon whether or not the government is going to get involved or not involved. The basic threshold is the accredited, non-accredited that we spoke about earlier. If you are a wealthy person, the government says, okay, we're going to draw a line. You can't lie to this person, okay, but we're not looking out for them. Okay, they're on their own. We're not there to protect them. So the government's focus is upon people who are non-accredited, who are not $1 million net worth or have income of $200,000 a year for successive years. They're going, these people have such small money that if you go down, you're going to have a dramatic impact on them, and we're here to protect them. And so we're going to put up these different requirements of what you have to do in terms of disclosures, filings, so forth and so on in order to do that. Nonetheless, they like to know where you're at. So there's a distinction about whether it's what we call an informational filing or it's a true analytical filing. If you're going to do almost anything in any state of any size, somebody's probably going to want you to take a piece of paper with your name on it and say, I'm raising money, so they have it in the file. So if they ever get a complaint, they don't have to go looking in the wilderness. They just go into their file, pull your name out, and go, okay, here's who I need to talk to. Okay. Now, if you're going to raise money in 2 or more states, you're automatically going to have this informational filing requirement by the federal government, by the Securities and Exchange Commission. It's called a Reg D filing. And there is a filled out copy in your USB to take a look at, but this is an online PDF form. You just open it up on the internet. It walks you through the different questions that they want you to answer. And then there's no fee for this. I believe you're supposed to print it and mail 2 copies, but they may even have gone fully electronic. I didn't check when I was online the other day. But the idea is that if you're raising money and somebody calls them and says, this guy just ripped me off, they don't want to go looking for you. They want to be able to find you quickly, and that's because you already have documents telling you where you're at and where to find you. This particular form, the Reg D, says what kind of offering is this? Is it accredited, non-accredited? Is it one state, multiple states? It's going to ask you for this type of information. It's going to ask you, are you using a broker or are you doing this yourself? If you're using a broker, how much are you paying the broker? What kind of fees and expenses are going out of this, out of the use of proceeds, to pay for the cost of this? They really hate you spending money on this kind of stuff. You can do it, but you have to then know exactly how much it's going to be. They have lines in there like how much of the money is going to the executive officers, in case you're trying to kind of skim around the broker by paying huge fees to the executives, making it look like it's not a commission when it really is. They want to know what that is. And then the state's involved. So what I typically do when I do an offering, you're required to file this, by the way, within 15 days of first receipt of money. So if you get your first investment check on Monday, within 2 weeks, you need to have this filed with the SEC, or someday maybe somebody will yell at you about it. It's one of those things. But as a consequence, you get your first money in, you have to file this, you may not have your second money in. And they don't care, okay? If you happen to get in the first, before you file, every dollar you got in before you file, you have to have in this thing saying, well, I got it from 3 states and I got, 2 from here, 1 from here, whatever. That goes in your filing, but you're not required to refile or to amend or update this for the SEC. They just want to have your name and know you're out there raising money and who you're raising money from. The middle of the road in terms of this is what's called a 506 offering, which is an offering limited to accredited investors. They passed a law a number of years ago to try to get all the states in alignment as best they could, and said if you're selling only to accredited investors in a private offering, here's the simple route, simple filing, simple compliance, this is easy. Anybody can do this. If you start stepping off the path to unaccredited investors or to a public offering, it gets hard in a hurry, okay, as far as compliance. You're going to require more documents, more papers, more filings, more fees, and so forth. Now, as you go from state to state, each state wants to know where you're at. And they don't want to come after you. They want to serve notice of service of process for violation on one of their own government entities instead of coming after you. And so for you to sell securities in their state, you have to fill out what's called a Form U-2. It says, please sue me by serving the Secretary of State or the Securities and Exchange Group for my state, and that's notice to me that I've been sued. Of course, they will tell you, but they've been sued and the clock's ticking, so they have you fill this out. What I typically do is I take this form, I check every box for every state, and then when you file in that state, they want a dollar fee, cover letter that says, I'm doing a private offering of X dollars in your state. Here's a copy of my Reg D filing, which I want to see your SEC filing, and here's my filing fee. Thank you very much, and my U2, and then that's it. Now Colorado, I think it's $75 unless they up their fees again. If you're raising money in this state, you file the Reg D, the U2, and $75, and you're done. If it's a 506 offering. If it's a 505, then they may start asking you for additional information. Yes?
You also cover 504?
504 is called a mini public offering. I won't go into too much detail, but you're allowed to raise up to a certain dollar level. You are able to do a broader dissemination of information on that type of an offering, but you have to be very careful not to color outside the lines, and there's some people like Michael Bissonette who's developing some courseware on this, on a step-by-step how to do it. But I've never done one, and there's a couple reasons why I probably won't. But I won't stop any of you from going down that path if it fits you better. Steve is telling me I'm out of time. Steve, we're going to go ahead and run out of time. Yeah, okay. Just to wrap up on the film version of this presentation, there's a lot more questions. I'm going to be here for a while to answer any questions you have, either as a group or one-on-one for today. If you need to get a hold of me, my contact information is on the USB, as well as you can pick up a business card here as well. I am available to consult one-on-one. Typically, that means you can buy me lunch, and whatever you can get in a lunch, the better off you are. We were making a joke the other day, fast food, fast information, Morton's Steakhouse, longer information. But then I am available to help you do anything you need to do with your stuff for a fee. And I'm happy to talk to you about that later as well. Again, my goal is to make sure that each of you knows as much as you can about what you need to do to go out and raise money. And I cannot underscore enough the importance of knowing who you need to talk to when you go to raise money. You can spend, most people fail because they spend too much of their time talking to people who will never invest. It's easy to do, it's done all the time, and you can't afford it. And in today's market, the simple way of explaining it is that a year ago, this was your target market. Today, it's here. All of the things that I've been teaching you about today are still aimed at the center of the target. Okay? But you just have to do a better job today to get to the center of the target in order to have a higher chance of success, to reduce your time, reduce your cost. Otherwise, you're going to be out there running around talking to people who may invest a year from now or 2 years from now when the market comes back, but they either don't have a high enough level of care or they don't have enough cash in their pocket to make a difference. Okay, so anyway, that will wrap it up for today. I thank you all.